want to start by introducing yourself and your incredible book, which I have a copy of here.
Mine's got sexy tags. Oh. Yes, so I am K.L Kettle. K is short for Catherine, but I go by lots of Catherine variety names, so it's easier to shorten it to K. That's the main reason. And this is my debut, The Boy I Am, with its beautiful shiny text, and it is a thriller, action, dystopia, speculative fiction set in a gender-flipped world with a young man who's been groomed to both be the companion of and the assassin of the woman in charge of this society. And he is of the mind that he doesn't really want to do it. He knows his motivation. He's seeking revenge for the loss of his best friend, but he doesn't feel like it's who he is. So it's about defining yourself in a world where everyone tells you you're one thing, but you're not sure what you are, and you're trying to find out the reality. That's my story.
It's an incredible book.
Thank you.
I read it in one sitting. I couldn't put it down. It is one of those books that kind of like, it hooked me in and wouldn't let go. I had to go get a drink at one point and took the book with me.
Hydration is important through the reading process. I highly recommend it.
Exactly. But yeah, the book, it felt like Bella from Beauty and the Beast just walking around the house like, I need to get my drink, but also I can't put it down.
That's exactly what every author wants to hear. I mean, you know, maybe the guys who write, you know, quiet books don't expect it, but I think if you're writing a thriller, you definitely want somebody to sort of, you know, become surgically attached to your book. And I remember vividly every book that has taken me a single night to read, you know, when it's 3 a.m. and you just have to eventually just prize yourself away from it, but you can't. So that's a real gift. Thank you for engaging.
My eyes, I have to admit, by the end were like, I think I was holding them open. I could have done with like little matchsticks.
maybe if we do a reprint, we'll put matchsticks on the back.
That would be very useful. I was like, I'll just start it before bed. I'll read it. I'll read it. No, it wasn't going to happen.
Advice for anybody watching: give yourself a few hours. If you get hooked into books, you might want to start it in the morning so that you're alert for the evening, and don't drive after you've read it.
But yeah, it's very good sleep afterwards, though.
That's good. I'm glad it didn't keep you awake. I've had a few people who said, "Oh, it kept me awake. My brain was turning. I couldn't stop thinking about it," which is again a huge compliment. But I'm like, sleep is really important.
I woke up thinking about it, but I stayed up so long and my eyes were so heavy that the second I think I put it down, my brain just went, "That's enough."
Done. I'm glad I tired you out. But yeah, no, it is a bit rip roaring. I had to work with my editors to actually pace it down. It was even more breathless in its sort of initial submission, and we put in a lot more kind of quieter moments and contemplative moments, and a few more of the flashback elements, which I think only really improve the book. God bless editors, and it still has that sort of relentlessness, I think, about the pace that I'm really proud of. Some people find it too pacey. Some people have said it's really slow, and that's fine. Everybody, you know, comes to a book in a different way with different expectations. But you know, once it gets going, it doesn't let go.
No, definitely not. And I think those reflective moments, there's a couple in there that the grass was one that kind of just highlighted the kind of issues and storyline that was going along and made so much sense to be in there. So yeah. I loved those little moments where it was like, oh yeah, you wouldn't know that because of the situation you've been in, and that would be a reaction that you, like, anybody would have, kind of thing. So I think it worked really well having those little kind of like quieter moments.
And he's a quieter character than the situation demands of him. He's quite an introverted main character. He has his extroversions, and he has his ways in which he expresses himself, but he's definitely a internal thinker, and does a lot of that, and is assessing everything all the time. He overthinks everything. And so, you know, when he's met with a new moment or a new situation or something strange, it really captures his attention. And so it was really quite fun writing those bits. So there were a lot that actually were in very early drafts that kept coming through. The scene in the garden, which you're referring to, those moments were actually in one of the early drafts. It used to start in that moment. The opening scene used to be what is the end of the sort of first act, when this very dramatic moment happens in this very beautiful place, which is sort of the last garden really in existence, at least from his perspective, or from the community's perspective in the story, because it's set in a tower in the middle of a desert. So, and at the top of this very big tower is a garden, and it's inspired by, actually I wrote that before the Sky Garden in London was built, but it's inspired by a lot of big skyscrapers where they do build these ridiculously beautiful gardens, you know, at the top, and out of reach of, you know, the people who can't afford the tickets to go and see them. And so that was the inspiration for that. And it came from very early on, the idea of a garden in the sky and a horrible thing happening there.
Yeah, it is horrible.
Sorry for everybody, spoilers.
It's such a peaceful, and then it's just like, oh no.
Oops, we did a thing. Well, it's one of those things you learn very early writing, is make it worse. And you know, I took that to heart, I'm afraid, everybody. I really took that writing advice straight to the center of me, and that's what I really like. I do like subverting expectations a lot, and playing with expectations of a reader, and possibly too much. I like twisty books and stories that, you know, take an expectation and turn it on its head, which is where the idea came from for the whole gender flip thing in the first place, really.
Yeah, that was one of my first questions. Like, where did the idea to kind of just flip traditional kind of gender roles and everything on their heads for this book?
I mean, it's come from, I can't remember the single moment where I was like, this is what I will do. But I remember going, I wonder, has anybody done this before? I do remember having that sort of, oh, it feels like somebody should have written a story where you're playing with this expectation. And I couldn't find anything that really jumped out. It was before The Power had been written, and you know, there was but there were a couple of moments that sort of fed into the story being born, and one of them was the birth of my godson, because I remember, and I didn't have kids at the time, and I wasn't planning them. And I remember thinking, how do I help him become the kind of man, if that's who he chooses to be when he grows up, that is a good member of society for the women and people he meets that identify as women. And I thought, well, what stories are out there to speak to young boys, or to speak to young men about this experience that women have that brings them into the journey immersively? Because there's some fantastic feminist literature or feminist leaning stories that ask these questions, but it becomes easier to resonate with a character that is written in the gender that you identify as. And there weren't many that I think dealt with issues of gender disparity that came at it from this perspective. And I obviously didn't feel like it was right to write a book about, you know, the gender disparity that is there today with men and women, because that's a story of that I can't tell from a man's perspective. I don't have that privilege. I have many privileges, but I don't have that one. And but I could write from the experiences I'd had and that I'd become more aware of in the last sort of decade. I worked in a very all-male job in the STEM community, and I never really felt my gender until it got to the point when promotions stopped happening and people were asking me when I was going to have babies and all this kind of stuff. It's like, it's not cool, guys. I'm just doing my job like you are. So there became a point when I became very aware of my gender, and it became well, the way that my gender was perceived, because I fit loosely in the middle, and it became sort of a big issue for me, and I wanted to write about it. And then I originally started as dual narrative, with Romilly and Jude being very even-handed across the story, and it was important to me that I was even-handed with the woman and the male perspective. And then more and more, I just wanted to write Jude, and I felt I had more to tell. And that was sort of where it came from. It became then his story, but the story of many people who have been held back because of the way they're perceived, not just the way their bodies are built biologically, but I feel like it hopefully translates to any other kind of form of power disparity as well as gender.
I definitely think it does. And I think, obviously, as a woman reading the story, I felt it highlighted what kind of I've experienced in a completely different way. I think reading it from a different person's perspective, I was like, that's ridiculous. And I'm like, oh no, wait, because that has happened. It almost seems more unbelievable written from Jude's perspective than it does in kind of more female feminist literature that I've read. And I really think it highlights that. Is that kind of what was that?
That's exactly what I was going for.
Yeah.
Because if you look at something, it's about that sort of looking at something through the looking glass, really, and suddenly that absurdity, and it's just like, this is ridiculous. Why wouldn't you give somebody pockets? Like, it's just ridiculous. It's an ongoing debate in my house about the terribleness of pockets in my clothes, and yet my children have deeper pockets than me, and they're only 2. And it's and the idea of there's a lot of stuff around clothing that I was very obsessed with, around color and where it's used, and how their fashions are different, and the little things people say and just drop in and expect. And yeah, it's probably there's I'd probably say 50% of the stuff I consciously put in, but there's so much unconscious stuff that just came in because that's the way I was writing it. And once you turn that mirror around, it just leaks in, and there's probably a whole bunch of things that I don't even know about that jump out to people and readers that I didn't consciously put in, but they're there because that's the experience that I've had in many times, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not, it's a I loved it because it was confronting in like such an accessible way. Like it spoke to me, and the characters spoke to me, and it highlighted some things and made me even more aware of the fact that like some of the things that happen at the moment I shouldn't really be putting up with, because when you get from someone else's perspective, you're like, that's ridiculous. Why would anyone believe that or think that or act like that? And I think that kind of works really well in it. How key did you find the setting to the process and the storyline? I obviously found the tower and the kind of element there worked really well.
Which part of it?
Well,
because
yes.
I can't get away from the fact that now this was not intentional, at least in the first 2 drafts, that it's a phallic symbol. I can't get away from that, but it wasn't intentional, I have to keep saying, but it's there. And I love the tower. I'm obsessed with high buildings. I've worked in them, and I find them claustrophobic and beautiful. And I find that they are they're a monument to our world that we live in, and they are monuments to great men, in the sense of there's a certain amount of, look how big I can build my building, to certain things in the world, and look how shiny I can make it, and look where I can build it. Look, it's impossible to build this building in this place. Well, I shall. And there's this one-upmanship about some architectural creations that I wanted to put in there. And so it was also very important to me that I created this underworld to it, this undermining of it by the people that it's oppressing. I was very inspired by High Rise and other experiences I've had myself, reading about constrained and claustrophobic communities. And it was important not only from a narrative, metaphorical perspective, but also when I was dreaming up how a world like this would come about, because it's not an alien planet, it's not an alternative future, it's not an alternative now, it's a projected future. And so I do have a historical timeline of, you know, how this world got created. And the idea is that a community of people took refuge in this place, and it was being utilized at that point. The kind of it wasn't being used as a building, it was being used by scientists to do experiments, and this kind of combination of people who were there doing science and people who took refuge during a terrible war that ravaged the planet. And also war is also used a little metaphorically for environmental wreckage as well, but something that wrecked the planet, and therefore this place became a place of refuge. And when you're stuck in a place and you are in a position where you need to repopulate, it becomes very important that you have wombs, and a little less important that you have sperm. And so that was sort of how this sort of power dynamic then starts in this culture, and then blossoms to create a misandric and very imbalanced gender-based world, where birth and life and the giving of life is valued higher than hunter-gathering, you know, which, you know, is the basics for everything in the story, for why, you know, the women are revered and the men are trophies, effectively. And good at putting up shelves and, you know, cooking and keeping the house in order, rather than, you know, trying to be breadwinners, as they use that phrase these days. So yeah, the setting is critical to the world that was created, as I think is the settings that we live in today, critical to the gender imbalances and other imbalances that we have, you know. Yeah. I could go on about architecture for hours.
It was something that like struck me, like that just works so brilliantly as like a way to tell the story. With kind of, would you call it the government?
Yeah,
government system, like how did you kind of decide that was going to work, and that there was going to be like one, without giving too much away, one person kind of like...
It came from the concept of a meritocracy, and the idea that I was trying to think of, based upon my understanding of the way women work. And I went to an all-girls school, and I studied politics at university. So these are the sort of things that fed into my brain. You know, if you're trying to create an entirely new system of power, would you lean into democracy? Would you lean into another? Or would you try and create something new? And the idea that this community began thinking of something that would be very noble, and the concept of a meritocracy is an interesting one. If you look it up politically, there's a lot of debates about whether or not it's possible to have a meritocracy, i.e. a system where power is based upon personal merit. Well, personal merit is based upon privilege sometimes. And so, you know, the fact that this concept, this honourable idea then gets mutated into a very similar system that can be corrupted, that is effectively an oligarchy at the end of the day, based upon cronyism and even a system of money, this idea that you give people merits for things that they do nicely, but you can still use it as money, and you can take it away. You can, in this society, you can demerit somebody for, you know, saying a rude word or dropping a plate or trying to kill somebody. So and then that then led to this concept of, well, how do you use that economic system to, in this kind of world, how are the young men and older men impacted by the system? And that obviously for many years, particularly in the West, women couldn't own property, they couldn't own money. And so it was a reflection of that, in the sense of these young men were carrying what they call them the sins of their fathers. So the men who they blame, although they never really are sure whether these people exist, the boys, it just becomes a burden they carry. From life to life, from each boy that carries the name, they carry that debt, and they're trying to pay off these demerits through doing good things, like, you know, marrying up and putting up shelves and cooking and, you know, just eking away at that. But the system is then keeping them down because there's always a reason to demerit them. So yeah, and then that became, with the architectural space and with the kind of government space, it became very quick to assume that the people of power would live as high above the clouds as possible, and that height in this place would be a reflection of power and merit. And so I feel like I could write fan fiction for my own book just about people in the middle. Just people who live like floor 20, and you know, they don't get a man to do their dishes, and they've probably got some, you know, old office space with, you know, awful windows, no view. And they're like, oh, everyone's going on about what's going on, but I have no idea, I couldn't care less. Who's in charge now? Oh, it's her. You know, I feel like a totally fan fiction in the middle of my book. But yeah, it sort of, it became about because I was just thinking about what kind of system would evolve from this idea of rebuilding the world, and the idea that people always have the greatest intentions, but they often get corrupted by time and yeah, the likelihood that people want to take advantage of a system. I do have hope for humanity. Please don't think that
Do you?
I do. I really do. But you know, only if we get to survive the planet. But it was, yeah, I do think that, but that's the whole point. Jude is my hope in this story. He's the person who starts to say no. And I always believe there are people who say no, and that once that genie is out the bottle, it's very hard to put it back in.
Yeah.
But the people will try. Maybe that will be a book too, if I get to write one day.
I'd love that. If you do, I want to be the first person to read it. Just putting that out there in the world right now. With Jude, obviously he's the kind of main character. Did it always, from kind of like initial idea, did you always have him kind of talking and speaking to Vic in the kind of narrative?
No.
I found that really interesting. Like, I think obviously it mirrors kind of his uncertainty in his kind of self, that he would be talking, I don't want to give too much away, talking to him and like questioning things almost through him without him being there. I just wondered if it was something that you always kind of had in mind, or kind of developed later in the kind of like writing process.
It really came late. And when I say late, I mean probably 2 years before it got published. And I've been writing it, I've written from start to publication, it was probably about a 6-year journey. And Vic was in the story in different permutations with different character names and in different ways from the very beginning. Sometimes he was there, sometimes he was dead, sometimes he was just outside, you know, living with the hysterics. And I took him out, and I won't spoil any of the story from the point from now on. I took him out, and then I realized that he was such a significant part of Jude's history. He was still there between the lines somehow. And I would refer to him every so often, and I was like, we're just not going to understand who this is. And so then I started writing these little flashback scenes, and there was one I wrote, and I wrote it on a workshop where we were playing with tents, and it was the scene where Jude sees Vic get caught by the lice and attacked, and it started with you, and I couldn't write in the second person, but it became a story of Jude telling this imaginary version of Vic what happened to him. You did this, you called my name, and it felt really intimate. I remember reading it out loud and crying. I was like, oh, my baby, my Jude, you're hurting. And then it started creeping in as little moments he would talk to Vic as a you in his head. And then over time it became a way that he was internalizing this sort of misandristic view of himself, because Vic's not very nice to him, actually. It's almost that little voice you have in your head, because Vic talks back. And it's that little voice you have in your head that tells you the things that you want to hear, but they're actually really cruel and unkind and just sort of eat at Jude and actually don't necessarily push him up and give him confidence. And so there is a little bit about him having to defeat that voice in his head and also recognizing it as his own, and that therefore he has power over it and he can say no. So it became a really powerful device, is such a cold word, but it became a really important part of Jude's way of processing what has happened to him and what has happened to his friend, and also the journey of him and how he relates to others, and whether or not Vic is the best friend he ever had, even if he believes it. There's a lot in there about perception and how you perceive yourself and how you perceive yourself in relation to others, and therefore who you connect to. And he connects to Vic very young when Vic's very kind to him, and that little bit of hope becomes everything to Jude. And so Vic becomes a really important backbone to the story. So thanks for asking. It felt like it was always there, but it wasn't for a very long time. I couldn't get away from him because he was in my head as well.
I'm not sure I'd like to have him in my head.
He was one of those characters that whenever I was thinking about book 2 or book 3, I was like, oh, I need to put Vic in there. How do I put Vic in there? And then I realised, why isn't he in book 1? I have to put him, he has to be there. But like I said, he had different names. He was sometimes 2 characters, and he blurred into Vic, and then he became a kind of a memory, and then he became something much more present with Jude's story throughout the story to the end. No spoils.
That's amazing, because it does become such like a key way of kind of understanding Jude. And it was kind of like having that kind of niggling voice in the back of your head that you never know whether it is quite, again with perception, whether it's really kind of truthful. So I loved that element. So that was just me wanting to know where the kind of inspiration came from, and if it was always there.
Thanks, Practice.
It was a very good bit to read. I
hope you enjoyed the payoff as well.
I don't know what's going on lately, but I'm on the best book journey I've been on in ages. Like everything I've picked up has just been an emotional roller coaster of a ride that I've not wanted to like put down. And like this this isn't a question I've wrote down, but is one that I'm interested to know. How do you keep track of all the kind of twists and turns? Like, do you have a very organized system, or is it like just all in your head? Or because I think write it down. I think
it's a bit of both. I like a spreadsheet, but I don't bring my spreadsheets out to play until I'm in hardcore editing mode. And then what I do is I go through it and I say, is everything in the right place? But I kind of know everything is in my head, and I know who said what and when. And sometimes you go back and you not flip like this because it's not a physical book, but in your document you'll go back and you go, oh yeah, no, he did say that, or she did say that, or they did say that. And then you can carry on from where you are. And I like a twisty book. So it just stays in my head. I have a very balanced, logical right brain, left brain. And so I also draw pictures. I like to, draw things on the wall, paper and notes and notebooks. But mostly, I'd say most of it just sticks in my head. And then a lot of the twists, there were more. I took a couple out. Can't even remember the ones I took out now, but at least the 2 big ones I can think of that I believe are the most powerful ones. One involves a death, one involves a life. The best way to put it, I suppose, without spoiling it. They were it was like they were meant to happen. And I remember writing versions of the story that made them not happen. And it was like walking down a brick, a dark alley and hitting a brick wall. My story brain wouldn't let me go down there, so I would have to come back to it. So the twist doesn't feel like a twist to me. It feels like an absolute inevitability, and therefore it's easy to keep in your head because you can't avoid it. So the two particularly large ones that you might be thinking of, they were in inevitability rather than a thing I had to remember. Some of the smaller ones, the ones that didn't feel inevitable, the one that felt like me trying to be too clever, or me going, oh, I need to just get out of the situation, those ones that left the book when I was editing it, I'm not missing them.
Yeah, I think if you like a twist and a turn, I think this works really well, because I think the way that you've written Jude and the elements with Vic, you as a writer see the inevitability, but I think as a reader you get so absorbed in kind of Jude and how he's seeing everything kind of work along. You're kind of seeing it through his eyes almost. So those twists and turns come in and slap you right in the face.
Yeah, and I felt that it needed to be, because it's a story about, because of the way that the society is built, and he lives in a box inside a box inside a box inside a box, and you know, and as do many people in this society, you only get to see the reality that you get to live in, and there are things that you then experience, and they wake you up and like, oh my goodness, I will never see the world in a different way. And then you keep going outside your box and you're like, oh, this as well. And that's his experience. And there's a thing that happens when you do that, which is you suddenly realize you couldn't trust the world that you were in before. And that your frame of reality gets wider and wider. And especially in a society that I've imagined up, that based very heavily on reality, you can't trust the people in power, and you can't trust the people who have more power than you, even if they're just one level up, like, you know, the men who control the dorms under the ground. Even they have their own little, you know, system of one-upmanship between each other and trying to survive, and that leads to deception, and it leads to conflict. And so having those twists and turns, I hope also is there to reflect the world that we're in. You can't trust it, and that Jude himself is an unreliable narrator because he's been gaslit for a large amount of his life to believe things that are not true about him and his friends and the world that he's in. And so it's important to put that in, I think, from a thematic perspective, as well as just it's fun and I quite like doing it.
They are very good twists, I must admit. They did wake me up and kind of slap me in the face and be like, oh, okay, where do I go now?
Yeah, and I think a little bit of it is part of me challenging myself as a writer to get out of this one. Yeah, you wrote yourself into this corner, now get out of it. Like, a little bit of it is trying to keep me awake as you're writing something over many years, just to keep it fresh and to give yourself the challenge of one-upping yourself, really, a little bit.
Well, it works amazingly.
Yeah.
We have it's time to go on to the book club questions. So we have some questions from my in-store YA book club. There's some fun ones in there as well as some quite like difficult ones, I must say.
Okay.
But the first one is, what is the hardest part of writing a book, if you have one?
For me, it's draft one. I speak for somebody who has been working on her second book now for more time than I'd like, and that's for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I like writing complex, twisty books, and I don't know sometimes where they're going, and like I said, I try to like challenge myself, and I like books that kind of feel a little bit like crosswords, like they kind of like make your brain go and so writing that down in its first draft in a way that is satisfying to me is very hard, and I find myself displeased with it and therefore I want to give up and throw it out the window. and I have to make myself come back to it and go, no, this is just the sketch. Now you've got to create the painting. And so I'd say the first draft is that. I love the editing process, and I love collaboratively editing with others and working with it on others. That's the bit I really want to get to. And so to get there, I have to get to a draft I'm willing to share with another person, which is normally my second draft. My first draft is the hard one. My second draft is the just hitting it with a chisel and trying to make it into some sort of shape. So yeah, it's the first draft, and especially now it's time. I'm time poor, and to really do the kind of stories that I want to write justice, I need big swathes of time to kind of get lost in it. And the other thing about a first draft that's hard is the sleepless nights, because you'll find that you'll wake up going, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to write this, I've got to do this. Or your story will keep cooking in your brain until 1 a.m. in the morning, and you'll just be going around one scene like a crazy person. Yeah, like when you get sort of hyper focused, obsessed about stuff. Yeah, doing that at 1 a.m. in the morning when you really, really should be sleeping. It's not fun, but it'll be it if you can get it over with soon. My first book I started writing when I was 15, and I finished the first draft when I was 19. My second book, I can't even remember. My third book took me 4 years to write the first draft. This took me 4 months to get the first draft out, and I think that is telling, because it felt like it just flew off the page. It's almost completely different. There are probably about 5 or 6 chapters, and the arc is the same in terms of like the journey of the heart rather than the journey of the plot. But it flew out. The story my second book's taking about a year, and that's predominantly because of pandemic and work and family as well as everything else. But it'll get there.
And I can't wait for it. It will be worth the wait and all the hard work. It will be.
The pressure is hard as well. I mean, the expectation when you write something like this, and I'm really so proud of it, and it's been Carnegie nominated and really well received by fantastic people like yourself and other readers and writers. Yeah, I definitely say that one has performance anxiety for both book two. Cross fingers.
But you should think of it as it's obviously in you to write it, so it will happen again.
It will, and my editor and my agent and my friends are all really supportive, as is my partner. He's, fantastic feminist and does absolutely his fair share of everything, if not more, when it comes to family and home life. So I get to be able to take the time out and do what I need to put another book on the table.
I'm so excited, but I won't talk about my excitement as I don't want to add to the pressure. Just
it's fine.
The next one I think is a very fun one, and it is, if you could bring any character to life from your book, who would it be?
Oh my goodness. One? Just
one.
Do they have to be, can they be dead at the end? No. I mean, Jude. I'm in love with him. Deeply, deeply, passionately in love with him, and I want to give him a good life. I'd bring him to life and I'd take him immediately to Disneyland.
Yes.
Or shopping. I'd take him shopping.
Some nice shoes.
Yeah. I'd take him shopping. We'd get some amazing shoes. We would have the time we'd eat ice cream until we were sick. And then we'd get on a train. Yes, a train. We'd go across the world. I'd take him to Kew Garden and Disney World, and I would just go, I need to fix you. I'm sorry I did this to you. Can we fix this, please? And I'd also pay for a very good therapist.
Yeah. Sorry I did this to you, but now you're here.
Let's talk about this. And if I had a second, if I could have a sneaky second, I would probably, Walker would be the other person I'd bring.
Oh, yeah. That I feel like he'd be just fun to be around as well, like to see what he'd get up to.
And he also was shopping, and I would also crush on him like a crazy person, because I still have a crush on Walker, and we'd dance and we would go and have an amazing night out, and he would woo me, because he's a how would I describe Walker? Suave, sophisticated, wants to please. Yeah, he would be a good date. I mean, as long as he doesn't want to kill you, you're good. But
as long as he likes you.
As long as he likes you, great.
And you haven't you haven't offended him in any way, you'd be fine.
Yeah, as
On
long as
the
you haven't abused him, you'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which means we would be great buds. We'd go see a show, we'd go for dinner, it would be amazing. We'd waltz the night away, and then we'd take Jude out to ice cream the next day. Basically, we'd be a family. Yeah, I need to talk to my therapist about that one. So yeah, thank you for that question. But that's a hard one, because every writer wants to be, we even want to bring our baddies to life, because you know, you can't write a good baddie without empathizing with them just a little bit and wanting to fix them just a little bit.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I do like, I think from a reader's perspective, sometimes my favorites are kind of like the baddies and the morally grey characters.
So who would you bring to life? Turning it back on you. It's hard.
I think Jude would have to be one, because that, like, I kind of just want to
Hug him,
find him some like Skechers trainers, something really soft and
yeah, good shoes.
yeah, something other shoes are available, but you know, something really like soft and comfortable for him to walk in.
Supportive.
Like, yeah, supportive. Something like I'd quite like, I'm a terrible cook, but I quite like to attempt to like cook him food. I feel like that would be really nice.
He would appreciate that so much.
Yeah, I feel he's definitely someone that like I'd quite like, Disneyland would be an amazing place, like just to like I can kind of imagine his face, like just
He'd be on a sugar high within about 5 minutes though. He'd just be eating all the pop, but no, he wouldn't, because he'd be worrying about his weight, poor lamb.
yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah,
it's a good question. Thank you, that's a really good question. No one's asked that one before.
Yeah, when I saw it, I was like, that's an incredible question. The next one is, what motivates you to write? Which is probably, it's either going to be an easy question or a little bit of a difficult one.
Okay, so big picture, what motivates me to write is an insatiable urge to get stuff that's in my head down on a piece of paper. And it's normally because I've not read the book, and therefore I want to know the end of the story. You know, it's that you're telling, every writer I know, to some extent, you're telling yourself a story, and you're like, why? Where is this written down? I need to know what happens, because you get bothered by these characters. You get bothered by an idea. I mean, even before a story happens, you get bothered by an idea, like I did with this story. What if this? Wow, what if that? Oh, has somebody written it? And then you go looking for a book, and I can't find one. Oh, I should probably try and have a write of that. And then if you've written a book before, you're like, I'm definitely going to write that. And then it can be anything from daily motivation to keep you finishing it, or yearly motivation if it's a really long story. I mean, this book I gave up on a whole bunch of times, but it kept coming back. I couldn't put it in a drawer for more than 6 months and try and think of another idea and another story. I just kept like being bothered by Jude. It's like having somebody whisper in your ear going, I'm over here, I'm still here, come and read me, come and think about me, come and talk about me. So it's an earworm. And then kind of more moralistically, I like writing stories, and I want to write stories that matter, because I like reading stories that matter, and stories that hopefully make people think. You know, that's what motivates me. So, you know, hearing that people start asking questions about their life and their experiences and the experience of others, if I can build a more empathetic world through the art of literature, then I am happy, because that is what I would strive to do on a moralistic side. And then the day-to-day motivation, that's harder, right? Because sometimes that is, oh my God, I hate my story right now. I really know I have to write, but I cannot. And sometimes that motivation is just a biscuit. I will have a biscuit if I finish 500 words. I will go out for a walk. If I, get on my desk, I will reward myself with a walk. Or, there can be myriad different motivations. Deadlines are great as well.
I always work well to a deadline.
I do work well to a deadline. And this is so pathetic, but one of my motivations is making that spreadsheet at the end, like sitting down and doing the editing. I really enjoy analysing, okay, I vomited this story out. Now let me try and understand it. The same way that you might analyse a book that you love and, you know, sticky tab it or try and make notes in the margin. You do that with your own book. It's really satisfying. Go, oh, that is over here and it's over there, and that might be important, or this character is in there for 5 seconds, but actually they might be really valuable, and I really enjoy writing them. Maybe I can write some more. And that process of discovery after you've laid it down and put it on the spreadsheet is really fun for me. So that's also motivating, getting to analyze my own brain a little bit at the end of it all.
That's really interesting, because I do design work. I'm more of like a visual person, and I'm very much the same. After I do something, I like to try and figure out why I've done it, why that colour, or
yeah, or could it be better if it was just a little bit to the left?
Yeah.
Or yeah, I'm the daughter of at least 2 artists. Both of them had full-time jobs but were also artists, and so I came to writing because I wasn't as good as I wanted to be with art and with creating things on a page using my imagination and a pencil. Words became the best way forward for me to do that, but I still put the same analytical mind as I would if I painted a picture. It's just harder to stand back from it and look at it, which is why spreadsheets really help.
Yeah, I can. I'd get lost in spreadsheets. I think I can use a spreadsheet. I'm getting better at spreadsheets, but I'm much more of a kind of like, I'd be like get the largest piece of paper with multiple coloured pens and maybe.
Oh, I do that as well. I really enjoy a diagram, and I my form of art before I completely gave it up as well, I still doodle, but before I stopped putting lots of time into it and started writing more, was predominantly comic books. So I'll often like block sketch it and, you know, do little windows and go here from here. It's almost like a storyboard. If I can't quite get the words out, I storyboard it. So I still lean into those skills of it. So yeah, I think any form of trying to get an idea out of your head and into the physical world, be it music, be it art, be it literature, be it through computer design, through myriad of different ways, it's one of the hardest things, and it's not talked about how hard it is. I do a really tough day job, like managing loads of people and being very important, and it's not as hard as writing a book. It's not, but it's valued more by society, which is a shame.
Yeah, I think the creative world can often be seen as kind of like a hobbyist, or oh, you just draw a pretty picture or write a few words down, and not seen as important. But you're just talented at doing that kind of thing, and they don't understand how much work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things I'm really passionate about talking about is marrying these 2 sides of my life, this professional side and this creative side, so that it's understood by so many people that there is value in both, and actually there is value in being able to do both, and there's value in teaching both, and valuing those at education levels as well, because more often than not the arts is seen as an add-on, a nice to have. It makes your CV look great or your UCAS form look great. It's critical to professional business if you want to go into that world, as well as any other life. If you can't think creatively, and if you can't take abstract ideas from here and make them real, then everything else is hard. So yeah, I think it's critical for humanity, but it is also a privilege as well. I'm also mindful that, you know, it's, you know, being able to invest time and money and effort into my creative side is a privilege of my upbringing, as well as my skin color and my experiences in life. So I try to make sure that there's space for everybody to do it, because I think that's important. Otherwise, the creative industry gets flooded with people who have privilege, and that's where you only hear one kind of story.
Yeah, that's it. It's trying to share that with as many people, because otherwise it is just that constant cycle of hearing and kind of your own biases and
echoed back.
Yeah, even unintentional biases just continuously echoed back. So it is really important.
Yeah.
Another question they had was, have you always wanted to be an author, or did you want to be something else when you were younger?
So I made the categorical decision at the age of 15 that I wanted to be a published author more than anything in the world. Like I said, I started off just drawing comic books and painting, but I was always, if I go back to when I was eight or younger, I was always telling stories. I would steal my dad's video camera and do stop motion animation, and I would write little short stories that I would give to my nan, or I'd give to people. Or I really loved the I don't know what it was about it when I was little. It just really spoke to me. I loved reading, and I was very privileged to be surrounded by books when I was little, and the worlds that they open up to you and the imagination that they open up was just, it was freeing, and it was incredible. And it was like opening a little vein in my body, and it just came gushing out. So I'd always written stories, but I came to them predominantly through art, because my parents were both artists, so I was always drawing. And then the older I got, the more my imagination grew and my talent didn't. And so or not in the way that would allow me to draw the pictures in my head as clearly as I wanted them to. Because art, particularly comics, it was really fixated on moments, whereas I was interested in, I wanted to tell a whole story. So I would spend 3 days drawing a page, and I would get one moment on the page, and I was like, my brain was already 16 pages down the line telling myself the rest of the story. It just wasn't immediate enough for me. So then I started writing proper book, and I said, I'm going to write a book. And I started writing a book when I was 15. I finished it when I was 19. It was a sort of point horror-y, science fiction-y, X-Files mashup of stuff that is ridiculous. And I printed it out and I made a cover for it, and it's on a shelf somewhere in this room. But we'll never leave this room. I stole one sentence of it and put it in this book.
Which sentence?
I can't even remember. I just remember going, I wrote a really good sentence. It's in that. and I got it and I put it in, and it stayed in. I can't remember which one it was, wasn't it? But and then I recognized that it would be really difficult. So I set myself a deadline. I said, I will be. When I said it at 15, this time that I set felt centuries away. So by the time I'm 50 years old, I will have published a book. This is my goal. I give myself time. I give myself the gift of time. And yeah, I'm not 50 yet, so good on me. I made it before then, but I really did want to be a writer, but I also knew that it would take a while to get there, and I also wanted a home and a family, and that it would be very difficult to do those if I was just trying to be a writer. So that's why I have 2 careers. I chose my career at the age of 21 because it would allow me to write, which is ridiculous. So I chose to be an IT consultant at the age of 21 when I came out of university. 21, a bit older than that. And I chose it because that job would mean that I would be working around the country and staying in hotels Monday to Friday, and that meant I could work on my day job during the day, and then I would be stuck in a hotel room with nothing to do during the night, and I would write a book, which I did, several of them. And so yeah, it really informed every decision I made for a long time. So it was a real gift to be able to get to a point where I actually did publish. And there are so many fantastic authors out there that don't get that privilege, let alone the opportunity to write a second book, and certainly to be lucky enough to have award nominations and to have such a good reception. I'm overwhelmed by it. I wish I could go back to 15-year-old me and go, it's going to happen, and it's going to be really good. And also never read Goodreads.
Yeah, I don't think I ever would if I was a writer. I think that's one place I'd steer.
I did at the start, and it was really lovely, because when any book gets published, for the first few weeks, it's nothing but 5-star reviews, and then inevitability kicks in, because everything trends to 3 on Goodreads, and you just feel like the world's telling you it's crap over and over. It's not. 3 is great. But every time you read it, it's a little bit like feeding that imposter syndrome voice, feeling the voice of Vic in my head going, you shouldn't have done this, this is a bad idea, even the good reviews. So I just don't read them anymore. It's not healthy. The good ones make me feel like I can't do it again, and the not as good ones make me feel like I should never do it again, neither of which is a healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
So just keep away. I go on it just to review my friends' books and books I've read that I feel I really have to say something about because they're so good. But I have the rule that I only review books that I feel like I want to give 5 stars to. So.
Yeah, that's something that like I've promised to do. Like, there's going to be books that don't quite work for me that are going to be 5 stars for somebody else, but I don't need to put it out there that it was only 3 stars for me. I don't I don't want to put anybody off finding that book and reading it and realizing for them it's 5 stars and they love it. And 2, if I was an author, like,
soul destroying.
Yeah, because I know how much as like a designer, my work's me. It's like part of my kind of like soul, if you want to call it that. And I wouldn't want to read. So it's kind of that like.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And I think that the other thing is that because we live in a society where literature is not valued, you know, where you can buy books for the same price as greeting cards or sandwiches, I think, you know, if it wasn't like that, if the literature world was highly valued and, you know, every book deal was a great book deal, and it wouldn't matter so much. The bad reviews, you just brush them off. But because you put your life and soul into it, you spend, you know, 20 years trying to get published, longer sometimes, less for some, but, you know, that's my experience. And because then we write books that take sometimes decades to bring into the world, to then, you know, have a review that, of course I expect not great reviews, and I'm fine. Sometimes I love them, actually. Sometimes I really need them to kind of motivate me to go, screw you, I'm gonna write a great book. But sometimes they're not great. And actually it's more about managing your own mental health in a world where what you have created is valuable to some, and more valuable than anything to some, and to others it is, you know, you may as well not have bothered, or they will take time out of their day to make you feel really bad. Some people not tweet directly at you to tell you how much they dislike your book, which isn't kind.
Yeah, that is not something anybody should ever do. I don't agree with that at all. No. I don't think if it's not for you, it's not for you, but you don't need to. I mean, the way social media works, I don't think sometimes people realize you might as well walk up to somebody's house, knock on their door and shout whatever you're about to tweet in their face. That's how personal it is. So I definitely think that if anybody's done that before, now's the time to stop.
I think I wholeheartedly believe in imagining people complexly, even the people who don't love my book. It's a privilege you read it in the first place, whether you like it or not. It's a gift, you know. I know so many people who would love to have bad reviews because it means they've been published, and so I'm grateful for everything, even the ones who really hated it and DNF'd it, it's fine. But if I can do that for you, then I think it's fair that everybody do that back. And just, we are authors, we are not made of stone, we are made of squishy things, and we are vulnerable and tired and underappreciated by a large swathe of the industry, especially you know, British kids authors. You know, we get so little marketing, and there's a lot of other louder voices. So the attention and time from yourself and from others who both read the book and then want to talk about it is the greatest gift.
Don't, you'll make me cry. I will. My eyes are watering already. If no, I just think YA is so important for a multitude of reasons. Obviously, I'm 27 and I love YA, but there's more to it than me just loving reading YA. There's such powerful stories in YA, and it's such an important time in people's lives, and it's some you can make a reader.
You can, you really can. And you could talk about subjects which adult literary books just sort of brush away, or you could bring such passion and intensity of emotion that a subject really deserves that. And once you get into your 30s, you're beyond, you learn to process those things, and they don't become as hot topics, and they don't become those burning stones, but they're still there. You just sort of groan around them. And I'm nearly 40, and I only read YA predominantly, and it's mostly because I just find, firstly, the quality of literature is insane. I mean, one of the reasons you're probably on such a good reading streak is the books that are coming out in the UK under the YA genre label are stunning right now, and I just want to shove them in everyone's faces. And they're not pretentious, and they are always interesting, and they're always full of passion and hope and love, and they appeal to more than anybody. I think it doesn't matter if you age, because for me the YA genre it's just about self-discovery. Every single story, whether it's a story of fairy princes and kings, or young boys trying to define themselves in a misanthropic society, or science fiction, or a kid who's lost their mum, they are all about self-definition and self-identity. And that is an important thing throughout your adult life as well as your childhood, because you're constantly, especially in the modern world, constantly redefining yourself and refinding yourself, and relearning who you are and who you want to be. And so it's always, I think, a really present theme, whatever your age.
Yeah, and I just think, as you said, like YA is getting more popular, and it's getting more noticed, especially kind of online and social media. But I think the UK just doesn't get the same amount of press or kind of marketing budget spent on it, which is why I'm hoping things like this can start kind of like highlighting, because there's some amazing titles that have come out recently and in the past that kind of need more talking about.
Yeah, and I will do it until even if I never write another book after my second one, I will still be the biggest champion for the community of writers in the UK, new and yet to be discovered. Because the other thing I love about it, particularly children's literature and particularly YA, is it is a breeding ground for topics and voices that aren't heard in the adult literary world, but start to emerge in the YA and the children's literature world because of the demand from the readers and the demand from the communities. And then that creates the demand in the adult literary world, where they get the awards and they do all the fantastic tours and book tours and stuff like that. But it starts here. It starts with young voices and young energy, and a demand for subject matter and characters and stories and voices that just need to be heard. And that's just so exciting.
I think recently we're kind of on the edge of something like special, like the books that are coming out at the moment, kind of the authors and the things going on. I just think like it's an exciting time at the moment, and I'm hoping we can continue to propel it along.
Yeah, and the other thing is it's a place where literary form is being played with. Like I was talking to an older person recently, teenage books are all just about sex, and I was like, you have no idea. And I gave them Sarah Crossan and The Poet X and Black Flamingo and Femi Fadigba's book, and My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece. I just piled stuff on them. I said, you need to understand that this is the poetry of today, and it is, you don't get that if you just read literary works. You get coffee table books, and you get travel books, and you get literary tomes where everybody's telling lies, but you don't get the poetry. And the poetry in young adult literature right now is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We could go on all night. We
could. The last question they had, and before we say goodbye, Oh, do you when you're writing, do you always have an ending in mind when you start writing, or do you follow the characters through, do you think?
Yes, I have an ending, and yes, I follow them through. So this is such a writery answer. So I always start with an idea of where the story will end, and then I let my characters take me somewhere else, because I think you need to have an idea of your ending, but you also need to be willing to deviate from it. And the analogy I've often given is, it's like plotting a journey from London to Manchester. You know you want to end up in Manchester. You know you're starting in London, but actually you may go via Birmingham, and you may end up in, Wales. You may keep going and go to Newcastle and come back. And you might take a really long route to get there and stop off in a pub and then go, oh, this is a nice person, I'm going to go over here. And you've got to give yourself that freedom as a writer to explore, but always have in your mind that where you wanted to end up is Manchester, but you're okay if you never get there. So the book, the ending for this book came in the last edit. I've had every draft had a different ending.
Oh.
I know. And I knew when this book was finished, because I just was like, that's the end. I just knew. I knew that my entire journey of writing the story was trying to find that ending. And I was like, and we are done. That's it. Nothing else needs to change, because it was just, for me, it was perfection. And luckily my editor agreed. but the the tonal ending, so the tone at which it ends on, was always there. It was always the same tone. It was always the same. I wanted to always have a little bit of hope there. And it was always the same journey arc. The changes that happened to Jude from beginning to end were always the same in every single draft, from the first 4-month blitz to the last edit. But the plot can change, because for me that is just, it's just the ingredients in the story. But it's like creating a painting or making a beautiful meal. You know what you want to leave the reader with, or the eater with, or the viewer with, but how you get there is a wonderful journey. So yeah, I like to be able to deviate from my plan, and sometimes write a completely different book to the one you planned.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, the first draft of this book was, well, actually I didn't tell you, but it's in a couple of other interviews. The first draft of this was basically a Romeo and Juliet retelling.
Oh.
That's one of the reasons they have the names Romilly and Jude, because it started off as that, and then it completely deviated from that, obviously. Just because Juliet is so stoppy. Like, once I decided that Jude was my main character, and I tried to write that plot line that was effectively very similar to Juliet's, and I was like, wow, no agency at all. You realise even when she takes the poison, it's because somebody's told her to.
Yeah.
Like, oh gosh, just have some agency, Juliet. So yeah, that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, I definitely think this, where it's ended up, is incredible.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me and letting me talk your ear off for a long time. I don't envy you editing this.
It'll be fine. I've had a great time. It's been really nice to kind of talk to you face to face ish, as close to face as we get most of the time nowadays.
Yeah.
And hearing you talk about this, it was incredible to read it.
Well, I hope any goodie bags have lots of fun stuff in, and that it's a lot of people enjoy it off the back of this. And I'm always open to questions on Twitter and that. I like to think of myself as very accessible as much as I can be for my own health.
Definitely. There are going to be goodie bags during the week, which will be this week by the time you all see this. Ooh.
Time travel,
yes. We have some signed postcards, and we're also going to have some wonderful signed copies in the shop, because Charley kindly sent us some signed book plates.
Yeah, go buy it. Buy it from Rabbit Hole,
which are gorgeous.
Thank you. It's my gold pen. I love it.
I know. I saw the package, I opened it up, and I had my copy already sat there, and that I opened it and I saw the gold pen and it kind of mirrored this bit, and I was like, oh, the like
The design heart.
the design heart in me just kind of glowed with joy. So I, for one, really appreciate the gold pen. It was a superb choice, I must admit.
I take that as a huge compliment. Thank you very much.
Yes, always. And it's this bit that I just,
oh, you know, a bit that gets me, it's the slight tinge of blue that Thomas put around his shoulders and his waist. Just that I love this cover so much.
It is.
Thomas Truong designed it, and he has done the most phenomenal job. And yeah, these just hints of blue in this sea of red and pink. Both red is a very prominent color in the story, so I'm really glad that red's in there. And the pink, obviously, for gender. And then there's just this swallowed up tiny bit of blue is just it's such a special cover.
It definitely is. It is the, like, when you all read the book, which you should, the cover is one of those ones that like matches the book so perfectly. Like, it is one of those covers that like totally matches the book, and fits in really, really well. And I just love it. I think it's gorgeous. So,
well, we should make lots of noise. Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to go and make tea, if that's okay.
Yes. So am I. I'm going to have tea and relax and spend some time with the dog before she never looks at me again.
Please send a picture of your dog. I need to see your dog. I'm yet to open the dog.
Because I said the word dog.
Oh. I have 2 cats, one of which was a dog in a previous life, so behaves like a dog now. We call him the cat dog.
Yeah.
Alfie. He's huge and he's bigger than most dogs, and he acts like one. And but I can't have a dog because we just don't have the lifestyle for it right now. But one day, so I live vicariously through other people's dogs.
Well, I will send you all the pictures. She is 10 months old and the craziest little dog you've ever met in your life.